Welcome everyone. I'm glad so many of you are joining us on a Friday night. So today we are here to talk about social media and its role in our society today. Now this panel is partly inspired by Elif Shafiq's book, How to Stay Sane in an Age of Division. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Carol Soon and Professor Ang Peng Hua to join me today. Both of them have been longtime collaborators and friends who I have worked with and studied social media and the internet for a long time. Now, today we would like to really reflect on the question of does social media unite or divide us today? Now, one thing I liked about Elif's book is that she actually really began with a sense of optimism, right, about what social media is today and its very much lauded potential for bringing about the ability to actually share your stories, amplify your concerns, and really bringing a sense of leveling playing field, right, to the kinds of discourse we have in society today. But she, in her book, she doesn't shy away from also the issues that we confront and have to confront about polarization. Now, without much ado, let me just give you a run-through of the program today. Each of us will spend about 7 to 8 minutes to give an opening statement. I will reflect on the kinds of social media facilitated movements and the kinds of digital citizenry that we have today, very much facilitated and mediated by social media. But social media is not just about the form, but it's very much also about content. So I will invite then Carol to address the topic of discourse on social media and the issues of misinformation, disinformation, and polarization. Now, Peng Hua has also been studying the internet and its governance for a very long time. And Peng Hua also actually manages a Facebook group that organizes itself around the crisis that we face in Asia every now and then, which is the haze crisis. So I will also invite Peng Hua to also reflect on what is important about social media and how it informs our everyday citizenry and discourse. Now let me start. I will share 3 points about digital citizenship and the kinds of social media mediated movements that we have today. A lot of what we see about activism, mobilization is not new. They have been around for a very long time. But I guess what is new, what is actually, I guess, emerging right from social media is that it has been effective in terms of mobilizing the kinds of participants that we have today. Take, for example, hashtag #MeToo, right? Just with a single hashtag, it has the ability to kind of unite people, right? Women and men alike, and everyone else that's actually resonates, right, with this particular hashtag. And it is not just in terms of their participation, but also the kinds of stories they can bring just with that one singular hashtag. So in that sense, social media, I think, has been a uniting force, right, in bringing about the kinds of citizenry, the kinds of concerns that people have, and uniting people, in a matter of seconds, minutes, and hours. So, well, in the past, right, people who participate in, say, for instance, signing a petition or participating in a march, right, they would kind of have to have a sense of, or rather a consensus in terms of what they see as a problem and what they see as potential solutions in order to commit themselves to participating. Social media, by now, right, as we all know, makes these kinds of participation in many movements quite easy. Now, but what does it mean, right, to participate? Does it mean that we all have a sense of common sense of what is the problem and what is the solution? And if we do not have that common ground, does it mean that the participation can also be in and of itself polarizing and divisive? My second point actually relates to one of Elif Shafak's opening paragraphs, and I quote, "We are made of stories, those that have happened, those that are still happening at this moment in time, and those that are shaped purely in our imagination through words, images, dreams, and an endless sense of wonder about the world around us and how it works. Not to be able to tell your story, to be silenced and shut out, therefore, is to be dehumanized. It strikes at your very existence. It makes you question your sanity, the validity of your version of events. It creates a profound existential anxiety in us. In losing our voice, something in us dies." So this is the optimistic part of her book, I think, where I think she really recognized the power of social media in terms of allowing people to share their stories, to share the problems they have, to share the concerns they have. And I think what she says here may offer a good explanation as to why social media has become so pervasive today and why it has become sort of an everyday tool that people use, right, on a day-to-day basis to share the concerns they have, the experiences, encounters they have, and also to respond to things they see online. Now, I want to reflect on this point to also share how powerful it is, especially for people who otherwise have no voice, right, or no access to platforms for them to share their stories. So in that sense, social media can be a very empowering as well as uniting force for people who identify with those concerns. By looking at and reading these otherwise unheard stories, we find common ground and we find kindred spirits that we can connect with. Now, my third point, in the interest of time, is about citizenry. And this is really about my reflection of how our sense of citizenry has changed over time. In the past, you may think of yourself, if you're a good citizen, you may think that, being a good citizen means that I should volunteer for that litter picking activity along the beach, right? I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, that still happens a lot. But in addition to all these activities, our sense of citizenry may also be very much reflected in the kinds of social media comments, the social media activities that we do. So in this sense, I would say our sense of citizenry has expanded to beyond certain fixated sense of duty, such as going to the polls to vote during elections, going to volunteer and giving to civic and social causes. It has also expanded to the online sphere where we feel a sense of duty, right, to perhaps call out things and issues that we see are problematic. Now, these are my 3 points that I'd like to reflect on in the context of social media mediated and facilitated movements. So my time is up. I would like to invite Carol to give her opening statement. Carol.
Thank you, Natalie. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me on this panel. So, interesting points that you made, because I think in today's climate, whenever we talk about social media, certain phenomena or certain concepts and developments come to mind, right? I think instinctively, many people would think of fake news, conspiracy theories, rumors, doxing, cyberbullying, and perhaps even addiction. So social media, perhaps deserving in some ways, have also unfortunately been made the boogeyman, right? And has been a target that's used to explain a lot of the negative trends, societal divisions that we see in the offline space. I think in your opening remarks, you highlighted how social media can be used as a tool by citizens to engage in as active citizens. I think those are important points, because I think for a very, very long time, even prior to the advent of social media, right, where we had the older forms of internet technologies like discussion forums, blogs, people were using different types of digital platforms to do good things. Of course, at the very personal, individual level, they were using digital technologies and now social media to seek information and to seek support. And I think this is a very important gratification for especially vulnerable communities, like you said, people who feel that they may not have a voice. And now on social media, they feel that they are able, right, to express themselves. We have also seen how social media is used by people to participate in what we call collaborative consumption, and those have positive outcomes, right? When you share resources instead of producing and consuming new resources, we are in a way helping to conserve the environment. And of course, very importantly, we have seen many instances of how individuals, whether on their own or in a very small group, use social media to solve problems that other people living near them are facing. We have seen excellent examples in the past 1 year, no less thanks to the pandemic, COVID-19, right? But we have seen how Singaporeans have used social media to organize volunteers, to collect resources, and to help people who are in need. So these are really good things. And of course, when we talk about social media, we have also, heard a lot about the ills of personalization. But if we think back to the beginning when algorithms were widely used, they were used largely in the context of e-commerce. And all of us have shopped online, so we are familiar with the kind of convenience and benefits that personalization in that context can bring. And I think finally, you made a key point. I think underlying the point about digital citizens is the fact that social media has lowered the barriers of entry of participation, right? In the past, you either had to be in a position of power or you have to have the financial resources in order to make yourself heard, in order to organize a movement or a campaign. But now literally, anyone who has access to social media can do so, and we see so much of that on, say, Instagram. Now that said, obviously everything, every technology, every tool, including a knife, right, or even fire, has its other side, has its less desirable side or its evil side. And we have seen how algorithms have led to the creation of filter bubbles, right? So when we are on social media, every time we like something, we share something, or we comment on something, the algorithm on social media platforms is registering that, okay, this topic appeals to us, we are engaging with it, and given our reaction, it is something that appeals to our pre-existing beliefs, right? Something that we agree with. So really the business of social media platforms is to optimize the experience for people, which means over time, we are fed more and more of what we want to see, right? And not just that, we are also directed to, say, groups and pages where the platform thinks appeals to us or speaks to us. So over time, what happens is we see the formation of filter bubbles or echo chambers or increasingly isolated communities within the online space. So this particular, I think, quote in this part in Elif Shafak's book really spoke to me. I mean, she spoke about not just individual narcissism, right, but also collective narcissism. So she said, sometimes narcissism is not merely an individual trait, it is a collective one. The shared illusion that we are the center of the world, central to group narcissism, is an inflated belief in the clear-cut distinctiveness and indisputable greatness of us opposed to them. And this is where we see the dangers of social media, where people feel that they are more superior, that they are more right than other people whom they do not speak to on a regular basis. And my last point is, we talked about how social media has lowered the barriers of entry. So the flip side of that is now everybody can be a producer, right? We have seen false information producers using social media to produce and distribute content. So certainly these are some flip sides of social media. So with that, maybe I'll hand over to Ping Hua.
Okay, so I think Carol had rightly pointed out that it seems like social media is given this view that it is bad, it's divisive. So what I'm trying to give here this evening is a kind of counterpoise to show some possibilities. I'm not denying for a second there are some negative things, maybe even many negative things around social media, but I'll say there are many positive things. I think the first point to note is that we as human beings want to communicate. So social isolation, solitary confinement is a bad thing. You're talking to yourself and you're not talking with anybody else. And further along that, it's not just that we want to talk to people, but we want to belong. So it is both, you could say, media in the sense that you want to talk to people, you want to communicate, but social, part of a, you want to belong to part of a larger group. And it comes down to our own identity, who we are, where do we belong to, right? So social media, in a sense, if you think about the groups that you have on your WhatsApp group, I have one from Sec 1, believe it or not, right? And that kind of tells you in a way who you are, right? where you came from. I want to use the example of the Hayes group because I can tell you something that happened. I want to say from the beginning that it is not to claim any credit for the fact that we have not had Hayes, just to be very, very clear. If a Facebook group can do that, I know that China and Korea and other many places, they will start forming Facebook groups, right? So it's that's not the aim of this discussion here. What was clear to me as a researcher is that the internet is strongest at mobilizing resources. It's not even, the strength is not even in communication, but really mobilizing resources, communication being part of it. Resources meaning like, for example, networks, of course, you can think of money, but you think of people and you think of networks, and these are resources to tap on. And certainly very useful for something like fighting the Haze. So how did that help, right? So once we put up this group, we started this group, the notion of suing companies that have been shown by the Singapore government to have done something wrong and it contributed to the haze, and we will take action to sue them. So lawyers stepped up, and we're talking about top-notch lawyers, top-notch. They served me Perrier when I went there office. Here I get served water in a red mud bottle, recycled plastic, but red mud bottle, right? I'm not saying, I'm not complaining, but Perrier, for water, right? Pretty cool, nice. And so I asked them, like, how much you're suing for? And they're like, must be a few tens of millions worthwhile to make it worthwhile for them, talking tens of millions. And these are companies that can go anywhere in the world, and for whatever reason, they've also decided to set up an office in Singapore. So I'm talking really sharp people in there. Some accountants step forward, people who are doing accounting for big companies, and like, okay, let me volunteer to help, if money and all that to manage, yeah, okay. And of course, I had some group advisors, for whatever reason, they don't step forward, so I'm kind of the front-facing person. But the point is that I'm able to tap resources that I would not otherwise get. I'm able to tap top-notch lawyers that can go anywhere in the world. They can sue in New York City, can sue in London, but in Singapore, they're available, right? So I think the key point here is that the resources are available through the internet there. But once this is set up, the thing is that you need to manage the group. And I was just telling Natalie that my group is a bit different because we have quite a clear focus. We wanted to sue companies that are involved in the haze. So we're not so much looking at, for example, forest conservation, not in itself, or the green movement. And so anybody posting there will now be like deleted. I'm very clear, the goal is very, very clear for this group. We're out to stop the haze, sue the companies involved, right? So things are burning and so forth. We set up posts and information about these. So those who didn't feel that they belong to this, some of them dropped out. And in one or two cases, I had to kick them out because they were being abusive in the group. And so stop this, remove the post. And the guy's like, no. I'm telling you already, you're a nice guy, you post other stuff that's helpful, but you don't do this, I have to kick you out, no? No. All right, I'm telling you last time, No. Okay, all right, sorry, bye-bye, And, well, this guy who's quite active on the group before is now back, but he's not abusive. So okay, welcome back, right? So I think if you're really clear about your goal, then, such cases can be managed. I would say that one thing that came out and kind of, you could say unexpected result is what maybe Carol has mentioned, that people feel empowered. So out of this group, we had some people going out to start petitions to companies to use sustainably sourced palm oil. So some companies, in fact, refuse to meet them. And then they say, okay, you don't meet us, we will, I'll tell you nicely, you don't want to meet us, okay. Set up a petition on change.org, and the company did change, right? The company actually began to use sustainably sourced palm oil. To be fair, not many companies are susceptible to this, okay, because you need to be fairly big, so you need to choose the targets carefully. These people did all that, and so through change.org, some publicity on the Facebook group, we're able to do that. So to my mind, you're able to do some things, with something like your Facebook group. I want to say that this is not for everything, and obviously you get some what we call extractivism. My friend in Bangkok, Chulalongkorn, when they had the big flood, had a Facebook group, and she did some research there, and they found that of the people who posted on the group, okay, yeah, let me help you with this and that. When it came time to actually giving time or money, like going down to help people or giving money, only 13% actually did that. So if you talk about the group, not so big in the space here, right? You could say they talk, but and mobilize, but when it comes to actually doing, probably not so. Sure, the lawyers and the accountant probably will, but for average person, they wouldn't. But the point is that people feel empowered, and depending on the context, they can do something about this. So I want to put out there that there are these positive things regarding social media. You should keep in mind, along with the bad stuff as well. But there are many good things coming out of this. Yeah, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks Peng Hua, and thanks Carol for your opening statements. Wow, so many things I want to actually respond to. So maybe just to start us off, right, I think I kind of have a question, maybe first for Carol, and maybe Peng Hua you can respond to as well. Now Carol, you talked about filter bubbles. And I think one thing about the kinds of filter bubbles we have today, not that they didn't exist before, but in the past you kind of know what groups you belong to and what kind of information we were getting because of that belonging to the group, and what may be opposing groups, right? Now my sort of concern I have with social media today and the kinds of filter bubbles that people have is that we may not always be aware of what are the filter bubbles, right? And we may be thinking that, all the posts that we see are all that's out there. That is the kind of public opinion, right, on this particular issue, when all we are seeing are actually posts that our own most intimate networks wants to show us or wants to tell us. What do you think about that, and what do you think can be done about that? Now, Peng Hua, you talked about the case of that one or two person you had to eject from your group, right? I know, like you're talking about the haze, right, which is kind of an existential crisis when it happened, we had, right? But I think even in the case of the haze, like other issues, sometimes there would be opposing groups as well, right? And what do we do with actually groups that are kind of opposing the kinds of agenda, the kinds of movements and the kinds of things that you guys want to do, right? And how do we actually deal with that, right? To kind of maybe even to engage them, or should we just, for the sake of coherence and collective activism, leave them alone and kind of move on with the original set of activities and goals that you want to do? Yeah, maybe I can invite Carol to.
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for your question. I think that's a very important one. You're right to say that filter bubbles existed even before social media, right? So just imagine a coffee shop, right? Days before the internet, was invented. People gathered in their own cliques and in their own groups. They talk about things that they share common interest in, whether it's soccer or children or pets or beer. But the point is, in an offline context, there is a greater chance for serendipitous encounters. Someone at the next table who may be talking about something very different, overheard, chime in, and hey, you kind of meet someone who is a bit more different from you, who likes slightly different things. So, but increasingly, because of the nature of social media, that serendipity is we are deprived of that serendipity, right? So therein lies a danger. But I think there are some positive signs. I think increasingly, not merely through sessions like this panel that we're currently on, but there's also greater education and building of awareness, and more people are becoming more conscious of the role algorithms and the social media environment play in shaping their experiences, in shaping their interactions, right? So I think awareness is a key thing, and that continues. That we need to continue to build that to so-called inform people, right? So they are more sensitive, and they will make hopefully more conscious effort to break out of their comfort zone. The other thing is we look at what tech companies themselves are also doing, right? I think since 2017, especially with the spotlight shown on tech companies pertaining to fake news, and then with that, the problems of filter bubbles and echo chambers were surfaced. I think in their own ways, they have been trialing different user features, trying to help people explore things that they are less likely to explore on their own. So we see some work being done there. What I find also very heartening is that maybe because of the greater awareness, we see more efforts by people, trying to bring different people together, right? So this was reported in the news just quite recently. A group of people formed a Facebook page. It's called Make America Dinner Again, MADA, right? So to date, they have about 850 members. But what's interesting about this closed Facebook group is that the organizers deliberately bring together people with very different political beliefs and on very sensitive topics like race, abortion, police brutality, for instance, right? And they have 6 moderators, 3 moderators who are left-leaning and 3 moderators who are right-leaning. So we see these kind of efforts, and I think, yes, if we continue on this track, hopefully people would be making more conscious effort to break out of their filter bubbles.
Thanks.
Yeah, just quickly add to that, filter bubbles can be deadly given our current situation, right? The COVID, and if you are in a filter bubble with wrong information, that can really literally kill you, right? So I think the point about bringing in diverse views and all that will be quite important. I attend conferences, and one of the tips that I give to people is that when you attend a conference, attend one session that is not in an area of research. Because we often hear things, you read things in your own area, you need to go outside now and then. That is a good thing about a newspaper. You read across, whereas if you read online, typically you read only stuff that is sent to you in very small volume, right? A small amount of news. Whereas the newspaper is big, and you read many items. So something to do with scanning as well. You should consider that kind of style of reading. On Natalie's point about the opposing groups, if you are doing anything worthwhile, there will be opposition, right? I mean, it can't be so easy. So there will be opposition, and sometimes you're winning people over because I'm an academic, maybe it's a bit different because I'm like, okay, I expect opposition anyway. We get it all the time. So let's take the Facebook group, right? The people who still comment like, okay, you just run a Facebook group. I'm like, okay, nothing to it. Yeah, I totally agree with you, right? But when you think of the boycott of products, paper products, right? The companies there. It was instigated by CASE and the Environmental Council, not the Facebook group, right? These are the two people who did that. Notice how the publicity went viral, right? So your groups definitely had a part in spreading that kind of message, right? But also globally. So it is possible, I would say, within limits, not for everything, but within the limits to overcome that opposition there. That's one example. Within the HAZE group itself, there are people have different views as to how we should address that. I try to use, theory to say, well, the theory would actually say this. And because I'm a professor, like, okay, you know theory, right? Okay, maybe you are right? So there's some kind of cloud that I have that may not be present everywhere. So I would say within limits, you probably can do something about it. But it's like talking to people. People may violently agree with you, and then at some point, you just have to step away. But I would say that often you can probably find some ways to reconcile, and meet them,
Yeah. It's actually speaking about reconciliation, right? This also brings me to my second question, if you would indulge me, right? Which has to do with the fact that I guess because depending on the issue, sometimes debates and discourse online can get so heated, right? And we may have read something or may have actually posted something people reacted to very strongly, right? And what do we do with that, right? How do we heal from these kinds of contentious conversation? Now, one thing I always tell my students, right, and also my colleagues is that I think we have to recognize that social media, social media's role in the context of a communicative ecosystem. It should not replace conversation. It can be used to make many connections, and many of these can be very meaningful connections, but it should not be used to replace conversation. What are your thoughts about this? How can we heal from, contentious conversations? And I guess alluded to this question is also the kinds of challenges, right, associated with bringing people with very diverse perspectives and people who are very different together.
So actually, if you remember our student Abdul, who wrote his study looking at the city of Ambon, where they have a civil war. Unfortunately, Muslims and Christians battling each other. And one episode was where the Christians thought that the Muslims were going to come to kill them. Actually, the Muslim was sleeping. Somehow the rumor went out on their social media, and then the Christians were literally panicking. And people began to literally move away from each other. They went to different locales, right? What he found was that the social media could be useful to getting people to meet, some of them to meet anyway, the leaders to meet. But a lot of it, of the healing of that unfortunate city was, you can say, face-to-face, forming groups, sort of meeting together, seeing the person, and that helped to a great extent. There's still division, but they're not killing each other, and there's some greater move to reconciliation. It did that studied, I think, as you know, won some awards. So it's possible within limits, but people on both sides got to work together. And sometimes social media actually was useful to connect people that way. So, there are some possibilities there.
So maybe that's the common ground that people have to find.
Right.
That common ground is that willingness to start having a conversation,
right,
to work together, to find.
Right. I think you're right. Common grounds over coffee. That's right.
Yes.
Maybe just to add to that, common ground, I think that's an important part. It also links to the idea of identity, right? And with the three of us, we are similar in some ways. We all do research, but we're also different in many ways. And each of us, our identity is, number one, it's not just one-dimensional. We have many layers, right? So I'm a researcher, I teach sometimes, I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm also a sister, right? And I'm a friend. So I think sometimes it's about finding that similarity. So the same example that I gave about the Facebook group in the US, Make America Dinner Again, the organizers found that over time, people from extreme ends of the political spectrum actually bonded over things like hobbies, pets, children, sports. So I think it's really making that effort, to find that similarity, that commonality, which, to be honest, is bound to exist. It's just that in a social media context, the way social media works, the nature of the environment is simply not really conducive. And oftentimes what we say is taken out of context because it's not so easy to provide context in a tweet or a IG post that you want to keep short to attract attention, right? So oftentimes a lot of difficult conversations have to take place offline, in the real world. At IPS, we have done some work on citizens panels or citizens work group, where we deliberately bring together people from very different background, and by that I mean gender, education, household income, professions, etc. Right? And when people come together and they speak about their lived realities, they realize that, hey, despite their differences, they all share a common interest. For example, they all want to, come up with, policy solutions on how to improve work-life harmony. They all believe in the power of the community to fight diabetes, for instance. But that kind of conversations are quite hard to do in the online context. And even in the offline context, the process has to be designed, to encourage conversations. So, which means that, in designing such a kind of conversation in the real world, we have to see, okay, how can people be made to feel safe? How can people be included in the conversation, right? So these are some important considerations.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Definitely, you have done a lot of work on Citizens Panel. So I think just to wrap up, right, I think we've talked about actually misinformation, polarization, even vigilantism, right, and the kinds of I guess we kind of agree that social media can be a uniting force in some ways, right? But it can also have negative impacts on our everyday lives. So what's really important is, I think, recognizing critically, right, what we are reading, what we are posting, right? But at the same time, also, think about seeking common ground, all right? When we encounter actually people and I guess conversations that are very different from what we usually like to hear or say, right? We have to maybe find that common ground, right, to connect with others and engage others. So I think Carol and Peng Hoa, I really appreciate your time, in sharing your perspectives with us. And I hope I enjoyed this conversation.